Welcome back to this week's Trimble Forensics Tech Tip Tuesday. For this week's Tech Tip, we're going to be looking at solving one of the problems of laser scanning crash and crime scenes: artifacts. For crash scenes, these pesky things can happen when an involved vehicle is moved between scans. For indoor crime scenes, this is a problem that manifests itself with mirrors, windows, and other reflective objects. This week, we'll delve into one of the tools that you may not know existed in Trimble Realworks Forensic: the sampling by station. When we come back from the break, we're going to deal with the troublesome point cloud cleanup and a couple easy steps. So stick around. And we've got our data set loaded up in Trimble Realworks Forensic. And what we have is a aftermath of a controlled crash where we laser scanned the area and the Dodge Durango was sitting here before the crash took place. And then we had the Dodge Durango after the crash where it was at final rest. Although this is a controlled crash, what this does is this mimics a situation where you may laser scan your car at final rest, and then as you move around to another area of your scene, say over here, and you're laser scanning some more evidence in this area, or just doing a scan of the area in general, a tow truck comes along and begins loading the vehicle up and moving it. And what you'll end up with is multiple copies of the vehicle as it's being moved. And it'll set up a situation like this, where you have the contents of one laser scan that are crossways or mirrored over into another laser scan. Now you can go through and you can manually segment these out, but that's going to be a very time-consuming process, and odds are you're going to get some bleed over from one laser scan over to another. So what we're going to do is we're going to move over. Right now we're in registration mode and we're going to move over to production. Now the difference between these two modes is that in registration mode, you're dealing with scans. In the upper left in your workspace, you'll notice that it has our OP1 through 5, and these were station setups, and each of these setups had a scan in them. So right now we're dealing with scans and locking scans together. However, when we move over into production, now we're dealing with point clouds. You can see down here in the bottom, we now have our project cloud, and we're dealing with one whole cloud. Now, if we're going to segment out of our cloud, again, we're going to have some trouble here if we're going to do this manually or try and zoom in here and try to pick the points that we want. It's going to be a rather difficult thing to do. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take my project cloud, I'm going to select it, and I just want to work in this area. So with my project cloud selected, I'm going to do a segmentation. And I'm just going to grab around our vehicle here. I'm going to create it and close. And I now have my Object 1 cloud. So let's rename that. I'll just rename it as both because it has both vehicles in it. Now what we're ready to do is we're ready to do the secret sauce, which is the sampling. Now, if you try to do an auto classification here, what you'll get is that the auto classification will find your ground. It'll find all of this stuff, but it's going to code both of these as remaining, which may or may not work for you, but if they're both coded as remaining, we haven't really gained anything. So on this one, we are going to do a sampling, and this tool is found when you select your cloud, go to your Edit tab. It's going to be over here about 3/4 of the way over to the right, called sampling. What it does is create a subset of your selected cloud. Now this also works handy if you've got a ultra dense laser scan, such as using, say, a TX8, or if you're using a TX6 or an X7, or if you use the SX10 on fine or superfine and you've got way too many points in one area, you can come over here to your sampling and you can choose a random sampling, meaning it'll pull a point from random. So here I'm turning it down. You can see here, if it takes 41% of the points, that's what you end up with. It basically decimates your point cloud for you. Spatial sampling. This will sample things down to a certain distance. So if you only wanted 1 point every foot, when you hit preview, it will make the points spaced 1 foot apart, and it will not show the ones that are any closer than 1 foot. going to reload them here. And if I drop my distance down to, say, 0.4 feet, this takes our 664,000 points and drops it down to 3,240. And again, it just decimates your point cloud. However, it does so using an algorithm that looks for spacing between the points. So I'm going to reload everything. And there are other samplings here that you can use. However, the one we want is scan-based sampling. What this is going to allow us to do is break our point cloud back apart by scan and make it behave a lot like it would be in the registration tab. So I've identified that my Durango needs to go. I don't want that in here. I want the one that's at final rest and not the one at its initial position. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn these light bulbs on and off. Now, right now, if I were to create, it would create a point cloud using everything that's turned on. So if I do that and I just click create, we see now that it creates down here in the bottom left a by scan. And if I expand that over, we'll see that it created one point cloud that has the same number of points as the original. Well, that's because all of my light bulbs are turned on. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one, say for OP5, which is scan 6. If I hit create, notice we have by scan 2 down here in our workspace, and it created a cloud with 91,453 points. Now I can rename this. As OP5, and I now have a cloud that is only the points that were contained in OP5. I'm just going to Control Z to undo that because that isn't the one I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is OP1. I want this one to be its own cloud because it isolates the Durango out. If I were to add in OP2, well, that adds our car in, and that doesn't help us any. So I just want OP1. I'm going to click Create. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything else and create another one. Now I'm good to go. I'm going to hit close. So I have my by scan here, which was the first one that I created. I can actually delete that. And I'm set. So now I've got my Durango as one cloud and my Buick as another one. But that's not quite done yet. What I want to do is I want to keep the ground in here. I want to move the Durango out, but I want to keep the ground. So in my view, I'm going to change over to parallel view to just make it a little easier to get sideways on the pavement here. That looks good. I'm going to select this scan, or I'm sorry, this cloud. I'm going to go into my segmentation. I'm going to say this is ground. I'm not going to be real precise about this. I'm going to tell it I want everything that's in. I want to create it. And now I'm done. So now my object 6, get scrolled over here. My object 6 is my ground. My by scan 2, that is my Durango. And by scan 3 should have our Buick and ground. Now what I want to do here is I want to take this and my ground and I want to merge them back together because I still have points here from my original scan. This may or may not be relevant, but I just like to put them back in anyway. So I'm going to select my by scan 3, which is my Buick and my ground. And I'm going to Control click or Shift click my ground from my Durango point cloud. I'm just going to right click and I'm going to merge these back together. And now I'm set. Now I've got my Buick in one cloud and my Durango in another. And this makes it real easy to put back into my original scene. Now what I can do is I can go back into my project cloud. And I like having my Buick and my project cloud. That looks like a really good scene. And I could merge these together, or I could do an auto classify outdoor on everything here and make that happen and still keep my Durango isolated in its own cloud. And this is one of the things in the sampling by station. It's kind of a hidden setting in there, but is very helpful if you have vehicles that have been moved just a little bit. Like I said, especially if a tow truck comes along and begins loading your car up, you'll have your car in one spot and it'll be moved back about 4 feet, and you'll have another copy. And you'll have the same car, same coloring, same everything, just in two different positions that overlap one another. And getting this isolated without this tool becomes very, very difficult to do. As you can see, the scan-based sampling tool makes quick work of cleaning up a scenario where a vehicle may be in the process of being loaded up on the rollback when we move our instrument. This technique does work equally well in an indoor scene, where a mirror causes a wall or other artifact to be projected to the other side, often embedding the points from one station into the next. Now, if you found this tip to be useful, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions about a feature or technique that you've always wondered about, be sure to leave it in the comments section below. Stay safe out there.